After losing his wife, a millionaire shuts himself off from love, surrounded by luxury and loneliness. Grief has left him numb until a devoted housekeeper and her paraplegic son begin to shake his guarded world. An unexpected bond awakens feelings he thought were long dead, but buried secrets and a treacherous past threaten everything they're starting to build. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Wood estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Alex Wood stood at the edge of his sprawling balcony, overlooking the manicured gardens that stretched toward the distant horizon of Connecticut's coastline. At 52, he had the distinguished look of a man who had conquered the world, yet found no joy in his victory. His steel-gray eyes, once sharp with ambition, now reflected only emptiness. "Mr. Wood?" A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. "For your coffee, sir." Alex turned to see Mrs. Jenkins, his longtime housekeeper, holding a silver tray with his morning espresso. He nodded curtly and took the cup without meeting her eyes. "The board meeting has been moved to 11, sir. Mr. Patterson called to confirm," she added, maintaining a respectful distance. "Fine." His response was clipped, dismissive. The single word carried the weight of his disinterest in everything around him. When Mrs. Jenkins left, Alex returned his gaze to the horizon. 8 months had passed since Rebecca's passing, yet the Wood mansion felt more hollow with each day. His financial empire, Wood Industries, continued to thrive under his mechanical leadership, but the man behind the empire had become a shell, going through motions without purpose. Later that morning, as Alex's Bentley pulled away from the estate, another car approached from the opposite direction. Inside was Catherine Kate Morgan, a 38-year-old single mother who had responded to the advertisement for a live-in caretaker position. With her resume clutched tightly in one hand and her hopes even more tightly held in her heart, she drove through the imposing iron gates of what would soon become her new workplace. Kate had spent the last 15 years working as a nurse before life circumstances forced her to seek more flexible employment. Her son, Ethan, had been confined to a wheelchair for the past 2 years following an accident that changed everything. Now 16, he required special care that her previous hospital shifts couldn't accommodate. "This place is enormous," Kate whispered to herself as she parked her modest Toyota beside the fountain in the circular driveway. The mansion loomed before her, grand and intimidating with its neoclassical architecture and perfectly symmetrical design. Mrs. Jenkins greeted her at the door with a warm smile that contrasted sharply with the coldness of the house. "You must be Ms. Morgan, please come in, we've been expecting you." The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than its exterior, pristine and perfect in every detail, yet utterly devoid of warmth. It reminded Kate of the luxury hotel suites she'd once glimpsed during a conference in New York, beautiful but impersonal. "Mr. Wood's son James is in the East Wing," Mrs. Jenkins explained, as she led Kate through a maze of corridors. "He's 17 and has been under specialized care since the accident 2 years ago. The same accident that—" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Well, Mrs. Wood didn't survive it." Kate nodded solemnly. The advertisement had mentioned the position was for a teenager with paraplegia, but had been vague about the circumstances. "James hasn't spoken much since. Mr. Wood has hired the best specialists, but—" Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "Well, you'll see for yourself." When they reached the East Wing, Kate was surprised by the stark contrast. While the rest of the mansion maintained its museum-like quality, James's suite had been transformed into a high-tech medical facility with state-of-the-art equipment. In the center of the room, a boy, no, almost a man, sat in an advanced wheelchair staring out the window. His profile revealed a striking resemblance to what Kate imagined a younger Alex Wood might have looked like. Strong jawline, focused eyes, but with a softness that seemed altogether absent in his father. "James," Mrs. Jenkins called softly, "this is Ms. Morgan. She'll be taking over for Mrs. Peterson as your caretaker." James turned his wheelchair slowly, his movements precise and practiced. He regarded Kate with wary eyes that held a depth of sadness no 17-year-old should possess. "Hello, James," Kate said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "I'm Catherine Morgan, but everyone calls me Kate." James studied her face for a long moment before offering a slight nod, acknowledgement without welcome. Mrs. Jenkins continued the tour, explaining Kate's duties and the household routines. The position included a private apartment within the estate's grounds, perfect for Kate and Ethan. Mr. Wood rarely interacts with the staff, Mrs. Jenkins explained as they walked back toward the main house. He's changed since the accident. He works long hours, often doesn't return until very late. When he's home, he keeps to himself in his study. Kate nodded, trying to construct a mental image of her new employer from these fragments. And James's doctors? They visit 3 times a week. You'll coordinate with them, of course. All the medical records are in the office adjacent to his room. The previous caretaker left detailed notes. By mid-afternoon, Kate had signed her employment contract and was given a set of keys to her new apartment. The salary was generous, the benefits exceptional. For the first time in months, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. With this job, she could provide stability for Ethan and still be available for his needs. "Ethan's going to love this place," she murmured as she explored the apartment, a beautiful 2-bedroom cottage at the edge of the estate, surrounded by gardens and with a clear view of the Long Island Sound. That evening, as Kate was preparing to leave and make arrangements to move in that weekend, she encountered Alex Wood for the first time. He emerged from his black Bentley just as she was walking to her car. Their eyes met briefly across the driveway, and Kate was struck by the intensity of his gaze, not hostile but assessing, calculating. "You must be the new caretaker," he said, his voice deep and controlled. Kate straightened her posture instinctively. "Yes, Mr. Wood, Catherine Morgan." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Jenkins speaks highly of your qualifications. James requires consistent care." "I understand. I've reviewed his medical history and current treatment plans." Something flickered across Alex's face, perhaps surprise at her direct approach. For a moment, Kate thought he might say something more, but instead, he simply said, "Good evening, Miss Morgan," and continued toward the house. Kate watched him go, struck by the contrast between the commanding presence he projected and the profound emptiness she sensed beneath it. In her years as a nurse, she had developed an intuition about people in pain, and Alex Wood was carrying a burden that threatened to crush him. The following Monday, Kate and Ethan moved into their new home on the Wood estate. Ethan, with his perpetual optimism despite his own challenges, was thrilled by the sprawling grounds and the proximity to the water. "Mom, this is amazing!" he exclaimed as he maneuvered his wheelchair onto the patio overlooking the gardens. At 14, Ethan had adapted to his condition with a resilience that constantly amazed Kate. "I can practice wheeling on these smooth paths." Kate smiled, grateful for her son's ability to find joy even after everything they'd been through. "Just stay within the grounds, okay? I need to get settled with James today." As Kate walked toward the main house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a complex web of unspoken pain. The Wood estate, for all its beauty and grandeur, felt like a mausoleum, a monument to loss rather than a home. Inside, she found James in his suite, positioned by the window as before. This time, however, he turned as she entered, his eyes meeting hers with a flicker of recognition. "Good morning, James," Kate said cheerfully. "Ready to start our day?" James didn't respond verbally, but he moved his wheelchair toward her, a small gesture that Kate recognized as acceptance. Throughout the morning, Kate worked with James on his physical therapy exercises, noticing his determination despite the obvious pain some movements caused. She chatted casually, telling him about Ethan and their previous home in New Haven. "Ethan's excited to meet you," she mentioned, as she helped James stretch his arms. "He thought maybe you two could play video games sometime. He brought his collection." A hint of interest crossed James's face, the first positive emotion Kate had seen from him. She made a mental note to pursue this potential connection. By lunchtime, Kate had established a comfortable routine with James. She was preparing his meal when she heard footsteps in the hallway, heavier than Mrs. Jenkins, more purposeful. Alex Wood appeared in the doorway, surprising both Kate and James. He rarely visited this wing of the house during the day, according to Mrs. Jenkins. "James," he said, his voice softer than when he had addressed Kate. "How are you today?" James turned, his wheelchair slightly toward his father, but didn't respond. The tension in the room was palpable, a current of unspoken words flowing between father and son. Alex shifted his attention to Kate. "Ms. Morgan, how is everything proceeding?" "Very well, Mr. Wood. James and I have completed this morning's physical therapy session, and he's shown excellent stamina." Alex nodded, his eyes moving to the lunch Kate had prepared. "That looks different from his usual meals." Kate hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I've incorporated some foods high in antioxidants and protein. They're beneficial for muscle recovery. I hope that's all right." For a moment, Alex simply stared at the colorful plate. Then, to Kate's surprise, a hint of something almost like approval crossed his face. "You've reviewed his nutritional needs?" "Yes, sir. I've developed a meal plan based on his specific requirements and consulted with his nutritionist." Alex turned to his son again. "I'll be in Boston tonight, James. Back tomorrow evening." James gave a small nod, his eyes dropping to his hands. As Alex turned to leave, Kate noticed his hesitation, a brief moment when his hand twitched as if he might reach out to touch his son's shoulder. But the moment passed, and he left without another word. Later that afternoon, Kate introduced Ethan to James. The initial awkwardness dissolved quickly when Ethan spotted the latest gaming console in James's room and enthusiastically suggested a multiplayer racing game. To Kate's amazement, James accepted the controller Ethan offered and even managed a small smile when Ethan's exuberant commentary filled the previously silent room. As Kate watched the boys interact, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps beneath the layers of pain and isolation, both the Westbrooks, father and son, might still be reached. But as her gaze drifted to the family photograph on James's desk, Alex, a beautiful blonde woman who must have been Rebecca, and a younger standing James, she was reminded of the magnitude of their loss. The happy family in that photograph no longer existed. In its place were broken pieces that might never fit together again. That evening, as Kate tucked Ethan into bed, her son asked the question she'd been anticipating. "What happened to Mrs. Wood, Mom?" Kate sighed, choosing her words carefully. "There was an accident, honey. The same accident that injured James." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Wood looks so sad, like he's always thinking about something that hurts. Sometimes when people experience great loss, they don't know how to process their grief," Kate explained. "They build walls around themselves." "Like Dad did?" Ethan asked softly. Kate's heart constricted. "Yes, a bit like that. But everyone handles pain differently." After Ethan fell asleep, Kate sat on her small porch looking toward the main house. Lights glowed in various windows. The kitchen where Mrs. Jenkins was probably finishing up, the dim illumination of the staff quarters, and a single bright light in what she knew to be James's room. The Wood mansion stood against the night sky, like a monument to prosperity, yet Kate couldn't help but see it as a beautiful prison for its inhabitants. Somewhere within those walls were answers to questions she hadn't even formulated yet, about the accident, about Rebecca Wood, about the obvious distance between father and son. As Kate watched, the light in James's room went out, and the house seemed to settle deeper into its foundations, holding its secrets close in the darkness. The autumn leaves scattered across the Wood estate grounds painted a canvas of crimson and gold against the fading green lawns. Kate had been working at the mansion for nearly 2 months now, settling into a routine that brought stability to both her and Ethan's lives. Her days were structured around James's therapy sessions, medical appointments, and gradually social interactions that the teenager had previously avoided. One crisp morning, Kate was surprised to find Alex Wood in the kitchen, engaged in a hushed conversation with Mrs. Jenkins. Both fell silent when she entered, creating an uncomfortable pause that filled the room like a physical presence. "Good morning," Kate said, maintaining her composure despite the obvious tension. Alex nodded, curtly. Ms. Morgan, I understand James has been joining your son for activities. Kate set down her coffee mug. Yes, they've been playing video games together a few times a week. Ethan's also been showing James some adaptive sports videos. I hope... That's all right. Something shifted in Alex's expression, not quite softening, but a slight realignment of his perpetual armor. James mentioned it last night. He spoke to me. Not much, but more than he has in months. The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Kate. According to Mrs. Jenkins, James and his father barely communicated, their interactions reduced to formal acknowledgements and necessary exchanges. I think having someone his age around has been good for him, Kate ventured. Ethan doesn't treat James any differently because of his condition. Alex's gaze drifted to the window, where the gardens stretched toward the sound. His therapist noted improvement as well. Continue whatever you're doing. With that, he turned and left, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floors as he disappeared down the hallway. Mrs. Jenkins sighed, shaking her head. That's the most I've heard him say about James in weeks. You're working miracles, Kate. Hardly miracles, Kate replied, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. Small steps, but they were moving in the right direction. Later that day, while helping James with his stretching exercises, Kate noticed him watching her with unusual intensity. Is everything okay, James? She asked, adjusting his arm position gently. After a moment's hesitation, James spoke, his voice slightly raspy from disuse. Why do you care so much? The question caught Kate off guard. About your exercises. They're important for... No, James interrupted. About me, about us, this family, you try so hard. Kate sat back on her heels, considering the question seriously. I believe everyone deserves care, James, especially when they're hurting. Even my father. There was an edge to his voice now. Even your father, Kate confirmed. Sometimes, the people who seem the least deserving of compassion are the ones who need it most. James looked away, his jaw tightening. He wasn't always like this, you know. Before the accident, before Mom. He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Kate waited, giving him space to continue if he chose to. He used to laugh, James finally said, so softly Kate almost missed it. He and Mom would dance in the living room when they thought. I wasn't watching. Now he can barely look at me. The raw pain in his voice made Kate's heart ache. Why do you think that is? James's fingers gripped his wheelchair armrests. Because I remind him of her. Because I survived and she didn't. Kate gently placed her hand on his. Or maybe because looking at you reminds him of everything he couldn't protect. Sometimes guilt manifests as distance. James considered this, his expression thoughtful for the first time since Kate had met him. Before he could respond, however, the door opened and Ethan wheeled himself in, eyes bright with excitement. James, I found that racing game you were talking about. He held up a video game case triumphantly, then paused, sensing the serious atmosphere. Is this a bad time? The tension in James's shoulders eased slightly. No, come in, show me. Kate watched as the two boys engaged in animated discussion about the game, marveling at how Ethan's natural enthusiasm seemed to draw James out of his shell. When she left them to their devices and headed downstairs, she was surprised to find Alex Wood in his study with the door ajar, an unusual occurrence. She would have continued past, but his voice stopped her. Ms. Morgan, a moment, please. Kate entered the study cautiously. The room reflected Alex's personality perfectly, meticulously organized, richly appointed, but with a sterile quality that suggested it was a space for work rather than reflection or relaxation. One wall was lined with financial reports and industry awards. Another featured a single painting, a stormy seascape that dominated the room with its turbulent beauty. Alex stood beside his desk, examining what appeared to be medical records. James's doctor is recommending a new specialist in Boston, he said without preamble. Someone focusing on newer therapeutic approaches. Dr. Winters mentioned that possibility, Kate acknowledged. I think it could be beneficial. Alex's eyes narrowed slightly. You agree with this recommendation? I do. James has plateaued with his current therapy regimen. Sometimes a fresh perspective can make all the difference. He considered this, then nodded once. I'll make the arrangements. You'll accompany him, of course. Of course, Kate agreed. When were you thinking? Next week. I'll have Mrs. Jenkins coordinate the details. He hesitated, then added, this specialist, she has an unconventional approach to psychological recovery alongside physical rehabilitation. Kate understood the unasked question. You're concerned about reopening emotional wounds. Alex's gaze sharpened. James has been through enough. With all due respect, Mr. Wood, sometimes healing requires confronting painful truths, not avoiding them. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Kate wondered if she'd overstepped, but something told her that beneath his cold exterior, Alex Wood was a man desperate for someone to challenge the walls he'd built. My wife believed in that approach, he finally said, his voice carrying a weight Kate hadn't heard before. Confronting truths. It didn't serve her well in the end. Before Kate could respond, Alex's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened instantly. I need to take this. We'll continue this discussion later. Kate recognized a dismissal when she heard one and left the study, but as she closed the door behind her, she caught fragments of Alex's conversation, something about investigation results and financial discrepancies. The following days brought a noticeable shift in the household atmosphere. Alex was frequently absent, and when present he was more distracted than usual. Mrs. Jenkins confided that he'd been receiving concerning phone calls from his financial advisors and attorneys. Something's not right, the housekeeper whispered one evening as they shared tea in the kitchen. I've worked for Mr. Wood for 15 years, and I've never seen him this unsettled. Kate had noticed it too, the darkening circles under his eyes, the increased tension in his shoulders, the way he would sometimes stand staring out windows. For long periods, lost in thought. Her opportunity to learn more came unexpectedly one stormy evening. Kate had returned to the main house after putting Ethan to bed, needing to retrieve some medical supplies for James's morning routine. The mansion was quiet, most of the staff having retired to their quarters. As she passed the study, she heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass, followed by a muffled curse. Concerned, Kate knocked softly on the half-open door. Mr. Wood? Is everything all right? When no answer came, she carefully pushed the door wider to find Alex standing amid shattered crystal, the remains of what had been an expensive whiskey tumbler. He looked up at her intrusion, and Kate was struck by the raw emotion on his face, so different from his usual controlled mask. I'll get something to clean that up, she said quietly, turning to find Mrs. Jenkins. Don't. His voice stopped. Just don't. Kate hesitated, then slowly entered the room, careful to avoid the glass shards. Alex had moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. Should I call someone? She asked gently. Alex gave a hollow laugh. Who would you call, Miss Morgan? The board members who've been lying to me for years. The financial advisors who helped my wife hide her activities. The friends who apparently knew everything while I remained oblivious. Kate remained silent, sensing that Alex wasn't truly speaking to her, but rather voicing thoughts that had been tormenting him privately. He turned suddenly, fixing her with an intense gaze. Do you know what it's like to discover that your entire life was built on deception? That the person you trusted most was someone you never truly knew? The pain in his voice was so acute that Kate felt it like a physical blow. No, she answered honestly, but I know what it's like to have your world shattered in an instant. Something in her tone must have registered with him. Alex studied her face. Your son's accident. Kate nodded. A drunk driver. Ethan was in the hospital for months. His father couldn't handle it. The guilt, the changes, the challenges ahead. He left 6 months later. Yet you remained strong for your son, Alex observed. I didn't have a choice, Kate replied simply. Falling apart wasn't an option. Alex moved to his desk, picking up a folder and extracting a document. He handed it to Kate without explanation. It was a financial report, complex and filled with accounting terminology, but even Kate could understand. The highlighted discrepancies. large sums moving through multiple accounts, ultimately disappearing into offshore holdings. Rebecca was embezzling from Wood Industries, he said flatly. For years, working with several board members and our CFO. The accident that took her life, she was meeting with one of her co-conspirators that day. Kate looked up from the document, shocked not just by the revelation, but by the fact that Alex was sharing this with her. James doesn't know. No one knows except my investigators and now you. Alex took the paper back, returning it to the folder. I've spent the last 8 months mourning a woman who was systematically betraying me. And I never noticed. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Kate watched as he moved mechanically to clear the larger pieces of broken glass, his movements controlled despite his obvious inner turmoil. Mr. Wood, she said carefully, learning. This doesn't invalidate your grief. You lost someone you loved regardless of her actions. He looked up sharply. Don't attempt to psychoanalyze me, Ms. Morgan. You're here for James, not for me. The rebuke was cold, but Kate stood her ground. With all due respect, sir, in a household this size, we all affect each other. Your pain impacts James, just as his struggles impact you. For a moment, Alex looked as though he might lash out again, but instead, his shoulders slumped slightly. James blames me for the accident. He's right to. Why would he blame you? Alex turned away. I was supposed to drive. Them that day. Business called me away. If I had been there instead of Rebecca. You can't live in hypotheticals, Kate said softly. Believe me, I've tried. They'll consume you. Alex remained silent, but Kate could see his hands trembling. Slightly as he set the glass shards on his desk. Without thinking, she stepped forward and touched his arm gently. Let me help. The contact seemed to startle him, as though physical touch was so foreign that it registered as an intrusion. Alex stepped back, composing himself with visible effort. Thank you for your concern, Ms. Morgan, but I'm fine. Please see to James's preparations for tomorrow's Boston trip. The dismissal was clear, but something had changed between them. Kate nodded and turned to leave, pausing at the door. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself, Mr. Wood. Later that night, as Kate sat in her cottage reviewing James's medical files for the upcoming specialist appointment, she reflected on the complex dynamics of the Wood family. Alex, a man whose enormous success had ultimately failed to protect him from profound loss and betrayal. James, a teenager grappling not only with physical limitations, but with emotional wounds that seemed equally paralyzing. The revelation about Rebecca Wood added another layer of complexity to the picture. Kate wondered how much James suspected about his mother's activities, and whether Alex would ever share the truth with his son. As rain lashed against her windows, Kate found herself drawn to the sight of the main house in the distance. Most windows were dark, but a single light still burned in Alex's study. She imagined him there, surrounded by evidence of his wife's betrayal, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the reality he now faced. The wind shifted, bringing a stronger gust of rain against her window pane, but Kate remained lost in thought, watching that solitary light like a sentinel until, hours later, it finally went dark. Winter settled over the Wood estate, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. 4 months had passed since Kate and Ethan had moved into the cottage, and the rhythms of the household had gradually shifted around their presence. James had made remarkable progress with the Boston specialist, showing improvements not just physically, but emotionally as well. He'd begun to speak more openly, even participating in family dinners with Alex when his father was home. Kate had observed subtle changes in Alex too. Though still reserved, the sharp edges of his personality had softened somewhat. He occasionally joined James and Ethan during their gaming sessions, awkwardly attempting to bridge the chasm between himself and his son. These moments were brief and often ended with Alex retreating back into his work, but Kate recognized them for what they were, tentative steps toward healing. On a particularly cold December morning, Kate arrived at the main house to find Mrs. Jenkins in a state of unusual agitation. "What's wrong?" Kate asked, unwinding her scarf as she stepped into the warmth of the kitchen. Mrs. Jenkins glanced toward the corridor that led to Alex's study. "Mr. Patterson is here," she whispered. "With lawyers. They've been closed in the study for hours." Thomas Patterson was Wood Industries' CFO, and according to what Alex had revealed to Kate, one of those involved in Rebecca's financial schemes. "Does James know they're here?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "He's still asleep, but they're not being quiet. I'm worried he'll hear something." As if on cue, the sound of raised voices echoed from the direction of the study. Kate made a quick decision. "I'll check on James, make sure he stays in the East Wing until this is resolved." She hurried through the mansion's corridors, but as she approached James's suite, she heard another door slam nearby. Turning the corner, she nearly collided with Alex, whose face was flushed with barely contained fury. "Mr. Wood." "Not now." "Ms. Morgan," he said tersely, moving to step around her. "James might hear," Kate persisted, keeping her voice low. "Whatever's happening, he shouldn't find out like this." Alex stopped, conflict evident in his expression. "Patterson confessed to everything," he said after a moment, his voice strained. "The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, and—" He broke off, glancing toward James's door. "We need to speak privately." Kate followed him to a small sitting room nearby, closing the door quietly behind them. Alex paced the room, his usual composure completely abandoned. "Patterson claims the accident wasn't an accident," he finally said, the words seeming to burn his throat as he spoke them. "He says Rebecca was threatened by another member of their scheme, someone who feared she would expose them." Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "Are you saying someone deliberately caused the crash?" Alex's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The police investigation ruled it a tragic accident, wet roads, a mechanical failure, but Patterson claims someone tampered with the vehicle. His voice broke slightly. "James was never supposed to be in that car. He was meant to be at a friend's house that day, but plans changed at the last minute." The implications were devastating. Kate thought of James, who had survived the crash only to wake up to a shattered body and the loss of his mother. "What are you going to do?" "The authorities are reopening the investigation," Alex replied, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair. "But I need to tell James before he hears rumors. I owe him that much." Kate nodded, understanding the weight of the task ahead. "Would you like me to be there?" Alex hesitated, then nodded once. "He trusts you more than he trusts me." There was no bitterness in the statement, just a painful acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between father and son. When they entered James's room together a short while later, the teenager immediately sensed something was wrong. He set aside the book he'd been reading, his eyes moving from Kate to his father with growing apprehension. "What happened?" he asked directly. Alex sat down heavily in the chair beside his son's bed. "James, there's something I need to tell you about the accident, about your mother." Kate positioned herself nearby, offering silent support as Alex explained what Patterson had revealed. She watched James's expression shift from confusion to shock to anger as the full picture emerged. His mother's illegal activities, the threats against her, the possibility that the crash had been deliberately orchestrated. "You're saying Mom was a criminal?" James's voice was hollow. "That someone wanted her gone badly enough to... He couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know everything yet," Alex admitted, "but I promise you I will find out the truth. All of it." James turned his face away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "How long have you known? About what she was doing?" "I discovered the financial discrepancies about 2 months ago," Alex answered honestly. "The rest, about the accident, I only learned this morning." "And you never told me." The accusation hung in the air between them. "I was trying to protect you." James's head snapped back toward his father, eyes flashing with sudden anger. "Protect me? By keeping me in the dark? By letting me think—" He broke off, tears threatening. "I've been blaming myself for 2 years, thinking if I hadn't changed plans that day, if I hadn't been in the car with her, maybe she would have been able to—" "James, no." Alex leaned forward, genuine anguish in his expression. The accident was never your fault. Never. Then whose fault was it? Yours, for not being there. Mom's, for getting involved with people who would kill her? James's voice rose, shaking with emotion. I want to know everything, no more secrets. Alex nodded slowly. You deserve the truth. When the investigators have more information... Not just about the accident, James interrupted. About Mom. About who she really was. I need to know. The vulnerability in James's voice made Kate's heart ache. She could see Alex struggling, torn between protecting his son and respecting his right to know the truth about his mother. Your mother was complicated, Alex began carefully. She made some terrible choices, but she loved you, James. That was never in question. Over the next hour, Alex shared what he knew about Rebecca's activities, the gradual discovery of financial irregularities, the complex web of transactions that had diverted millions from the company, the growing evidence that she had been working with several high-ranking executives for years. James listened silently, tears streaming down his face as the mother he remembered was slowly replaced by someone he'd never truly known. When Alex finished, an oppressive silence filled the room. Kate moved closer to James, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's okay to feel confused, angry, betrayed, she said softly. All of those feelings are valid. James looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. How do I reconcile the mom I knew with this person? It was Alex who answered, his voice rough with emotion. I ask myself the same question every day. The Rebecca I married, the woman I built a life with, I don't know how to align her with the person in those financial records. James was quiet, for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. Finally, he looked up at his father with a new understanding in his eyes. Is that why you've been so distant? Why you could barely look at me after the accident? Alex swallowed hard, visibly struggling with the question. I failed to protect you both, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. And every time I looked at you, I was reminded of that failure. Dad. James reached out hesitantly, the first time he'd initiated contact with his father since the accident. You didn't know. The simple gesture broke something in Alex. He took his son's hand, his composure finally crumbling. Kate quietly stepped away, giving father and son the privacy they needed for this long-overdue moment of connection. In the hallway, she found Mrs. Jenkins hovering anxiously. The lawyers are gone, the housekeeper informed her, but Mr. Patterson left this for you. She handed Kate a sealed envelope with her name written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. Confused, Kate opened it to find a brief note. There's more to the story. Your son's accident wasn't random either. Call this number if you want the truth. Below was a phone number and the initials TP. Kate felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands trembled as she reread the note, trying to make sense of the implication. Ethan's accident, the drunk driver who had left her son paralyzed, somehow connected to the Westbrooks. It seemed impossible, yet the note suggested a deliberate pattern rather than tragic coincidence. Ms. Morgan, are you all right? Mrs. Jenkins asked, concerned by Kate's sudden pallor. I'm fine, Kate managed, tucking the note into her pocket. Just surprised. Later that evening, after making sure James was settled, Kate returned to her cottage to find Ethan playing a video game in the living room, his wheelchair positioned close to the TV. How's James doing? Ethan asked, pausing his game. Mrs. Jenkins said something big was happening at the main house. Kate sat down beside her son, studying his face, the same bright eyes and determined spirit that had carried him through his recovery. James, he's having a difficult day, she answered carefully. He learned some upsetting things about his mother. Ethan nodded with a wisdom beyond his years. That's hard when you find out your parents aren't who you thought they were. The comment struck Kate like a physical blow, knowing how Ethan had struggled with his father's abandonment. Ethan, what do you remember about your accident? Her son looked surprised by the question. Not much. It happened so fast. Why? Kate hesitated, unsure how much to share about Patterson's cryptic note. I'm just trying to understand something. The police report said the driver was intoxicated, but did you notice anything unusual before the impact? Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. I remember headlights coming toward us really fast. You swerved, but they seemed to follow us. I always thought that was weird, but the police said the driver was just too drunk to control the car. Chill ran through Kate. If what Patterson implied was true, if Ethan's accident had been deliberate rather than random, then someone had targeted her son specifically. But why? She had no connection to Wood Industries until months after Ethan's accident, unless the connection wasn't through her, but through Ethan's father, Michael. Michael Morgan had worked for a financial consulting firm before abandoning his family. Kate had never delved deeply into his professional life, focusing instead on keeping Ethan stable after the double trauma of the accident and his father's departure. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the cottage door. When she opened it, she found Alex standing on her porch, looking exhausted but somehow lighter than she'd ever seen him. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said formally, but James asked if Ethan might join him for dinner at the main house. "He doesn't want to be alone tonight." Kate nodded, understanding the request beneath the words. James needed the normalcy and support that Ethan's friendship provided. "Of course, we'll both come." As Ethan gathered his things, Alex remained on the porch, his gaze drifting toward the sound now hidden by darkness. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being there today. For James." "He's a remarkable young man," Kate replied. "You both are, navigating something so difficult." Alex turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Patterson mentioned your name before he left. Did he contact you?" Kate hesitated, torn between sharing Patterson's note and protecting Ethan from further distress. "He left me a message suggesting Ethan's accident might not have been random." She kept her voice low, ensuring Ethan couldn't overhear from inside. Alex's expression darkened. "What exactly did he say?" "That there's more to the story. That Ethan's accident wasn't random either." Kate took a deep breath. "Mr. Wood, I worked at New Haven General when your wife was brought in after the crash. I wasn't directly involved in her care, but I was on shift that night." The revelation seemed to shock Alex. "You never mentioned this." "It didn't seem relevant to my position here. The connection didn't occur to me until today." Kate looked back toward the cottage where Ethan was gathering his things. "But now I'm wondering if there's a reason someone wanted to harm both our families." Alex was silent for a long moment, processing this new information. Finally, he said, "We'll figure this out together. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time since reading Patterson's note, Kate felt a glimmer of hope that the truth, however painful, might eventually come to light. As they walked together toward the main house, their breaths forming clouds in the cold winter air, Kate found herself studying Alex's profile. The harsh lines of grief and anger that had defined his features for so long seemed softened by the emotional breakthrough with James. Perhaps in confronting the past, both father and son had taken the first steps toward healing. What neither of them could know was that the revelations of that day were only the beginning. The web of deception surrounding Rebecca Wood's activities stretched far wider than either imagined, and somewhere within that tangled network lay the answers they both sought. About the accidents that had altered their lives forever, and about the connections that had brought their broken families together. Spring arrived at the Wood estate, bringing with it a tentative renewal. The gardens bloomed with fresh life, mirroring the subtle transformations taking place within the mansion's walls. 6 months had passed since Thomas Patterson's revelations had shaken the foundations of both the Wood and Morgan families, setting in motion a careful unraveling of long-buried secrets. Kate stood by the large bay window in the mansion's sunroom, watching as James and Ethan raced their wheelchairs along the paved garden paths, their laughter carrying across the distance. The sight never failed to warm her heart. 2 young men who had found in each other the understanding and acceptance they both desperately needed. "They're getting faster," Alex commented, joining her at the window. His presence beside her felt natural now, comfortable in a way she couldn't have imagined when she first arrived at the estate. "James has been pushing himself hard in therapy," Kate replied with a smile. He's determined to beat Ethan in their next official race. Alex nodded, pride evident in his expression. The past months had seen remarkable progress in James's rehabilitation, not just physically, but emotionally. The teenager who had once been withdrawn and silent now spoke confidently, participated actively in his treatment, and had even begun making plans to attend college in the fall. "The investigators called this morning," Alex said after a moment, his tone shifting to something more serious. "They've completed their review of the evidence." Kate turned to face him fully, her heart quickening. "And?" "Rebecca was being blackmailed," he said carefully, "by a former colleague who discovered her embezzlement scheme, a man named Victor Harrington. He threatened to expose her unless she gave him a significant portion of the money." Kate frowned, trying to connect this new information to what they already knew. "Was he responsible for tampering with her car?" "No," Alex shook his head. "The investigation confirmed that the brake lines were deliberately damaged, but Harrington was in Europe when it happened. The police believe it was someone else in the organization, someone who feared Rebecca might expose the entire operation to save herself from the blackmail." "And Ethan's accident?" Kate asked, the question that had haunted her for months. Alex's expression softened with sympathy. "The driver who hit your car wasn't just a random drunk. He was hired by someone connected to Wood Industries, specifically to send a warning to your ex-husband, Michael." Kate felt a familiar chill at the confirmation of what they had begun to suspect. Michael was involved in Rebecca's scheme. "More than involved," Alex confirmed. "According to the financial records the investigators uncovered, he was one of the architects. His firm handled much of the offshore accounting that concealed the embezzled funds." The revelation was still difficult for Kate to process, despite the evidence they had gradually accumulated. Her ex-husband, a man she had once loved and trusted, had been part of a criminal conspiracy that ultimately endangered their son's life. "Does Ethan know yet?" Alex asked gently. Kate shook her head. "I'm waiting for the right time. He's finally in such a good place emotionally. I don't want to disrupt that." Alex nodded in understanding. "You'll know when it's right." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their sons continue their wheelchair race through the gardens. The bond between James and Ethan had been unexpected but profound, two teenagers who understood each other's physical challenges and emotional scars in ways no one else could. "The board meeting went well yesterday," Alex said, changing the subject. "The new financial controls are in place, and the company's reputation is stabilizing." The months following Patterson's confession had been turbulent for Wood Industries. 3 board members had been implicated in the embezzlement scheme, along with several high-ranking executives. Alex had overseen a complete restructuring of the company's leadership and financial systems, working tirelessly to salvage what his wife and her co-conspirators had nearly destroyed. "You've accomplished something remarkable," Kate said sincerely. "Rebuilding from that kind of betrayal takes extraordinary strength." Alex's gaze met hers, intensity in his steel-gray eyes. "I had help." The simple acknowledgement carried more meaning than either of them needed to articulate. In the midst of uncovering painful truths and navigating their aftermath, something unexpected had developed between them, a connection built on shared pain, mutual respect, and growing affection. Kate had first noticed the shift in their relationship. During the long hours they spent combing through financial records and police reports, searching for links between Rebecca's activities and Ethan's accident. What began as a practical alliance had gradually deepened into something more personal. "The renovation plans for the East Wing are finalized," Alex continued. "The contractor believes they can complete the accessible modifications by August, before James leaves for college. The decision to transform part of the mansion into a fully accessible living space had been Alex's idea, a way to ensure that both James and Ethan would always have a place where their physical challenges presented no barriers. Kate had been touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture, recognizing it as Alex's way of embracing not just his son's reality, but Ethan's as well. "Have you given any more thought to my proposal?" Alex asked, a rare uncertainty in his voice. 3 weeks earlier, as they sat in his study reviewing the latest findings from the investigators, Alex had surprised Kate with an unexpected suggestion that she consider a permanent position at Wood Industries, heading up a new charitable foundation focused on rehabilitation services for young people with spinal cord injuries. "I have," Kate replied, turning to face him fully. "It's an incredible opportunity, but you're concerned about the appearance of impropriety," Alex finished for her, understanding in his eyes. Kate nodded. Their growing personal connection was no secret within the household, though both had maintained professional boundaries out of respect for their sons and the complex circumstances that had brought them together. "What if I told you that's no longer a concern for me?" Alex said quietly. "The board is aware of our relationship and supports the foundation regardless. Your qualifications are unquestionable, Kate. Your nursing background, your experience, navigating the healthcare system with Ethan, your compassion, you're exactly who we need." Kate felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words, not just the professional validation, but the open acknowledgement of what had been developing between them. And James? How would he feel about it? Alex's lips curved into a rare, full smile. Actually, it was his idea. He's quite perceptive, you know. Before Kate could respond, the sunroom door burst open as James and Ethan wheeled themselves in, faces flushed with exertion and excitement. "Mom! James broke his record!" Ethan exclaimed. 3 minutes 42 seconds for the full garden circuit. James beamed with pride. "The new chair makes a huge difference. Thanks for convincing me to try it, Dad." The casual gratitude in his son's voice visibly affected Alex, who had spent months rebuilding their relationship, one careful interaction at a time. "You did the hard work," he replied, resting a hand briefly on James's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "We were thinking of heading into town for ice cream," James continued. "Is that okay?" "Of course," Kate replied. "Just be back for dinner. We're celebrating Mrs. Jenkins' birthday, remember?" As the boys left to prepare for their outing, Kate found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, she had arrived at the Wood estate seeking stability for herself and Ethan, finding instead a family as broken as her own. Now somehow those broken pieces had begun to find new arrangements. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole in a different way. "You're quiet," Alex observed, moving closer to her. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Kate admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered that job advertisement." Alex's expression grew serious. "I was. Existing, not living. James was retreating further into himself every day. Without you." He trailed off, then rallied. "You brought life back to this house, Kate, to both of us." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. For so long, Kate had defined herself by her role as Ethan's mother and protector, setting aside her own needs and desires in service to his. The possibility of something more, a partnership, a shared future, had seemed beyond reach. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Alex said, his tone shifting subtly. "I've been considering selling this house." The statement caught Kate by surprise. "The estate? But it's been in your family for generations." Alex nodded, gazing around the sunroom with a contemplative expression. "And for most of those generations, it was a happy home, but for James and me, it holds too many painful memories, too many ghosts." He turned back to Kate. "I thought perhaps we might look for something new, something that could be ours without the shadows of the past." The implication of his words wasn't lost on Kate. Ours. Alex's gaze was steady, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "If you'd consider it. For you and Ethan, with James and me. A fresh start for all of us." Kate felt her heart expand with unexpected hope. "Alex." "I know it's soon," he continued quickly. "I know we're still finding our way. But I've spent too much of my life not saying what matters, Kate, not acknowledging what's real until it's too late." He took her hand gently, his touch conveying what words struggled to express. "When Rebecca's deception came to light, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Never let anyone close enough to matter. But you showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that there's strength in opening yourself to possibility, despite the risks." Kate looked up at him, seeing not the cold, distant man she'd first met, but someone who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. "We both have scars," she said softly. "We both know what it means to lose everything you thought was certain." "Perhaps that's why this feels different," Alex replied, "because we see each other clearly. Past and present, strengths and flaws." In Tati, the soft spring light filtering through the windows, Kate allowed herself to imagine it, a new home, a blended family, a future built on shared understanding rather than illusion. It wouldn't be perfect. There would still be challenges, still be days when the weight of the past pressed down heavily. But together perhaps they could navigate those waters with grace. "Think about it," Alex said gently. "No pressure, no timeline, just possibility." Kate nodded, a smile spreading across her face as she squeezed his hand in return. "I'll think about it." That evening, as they gathered around the dining table to celebrate Mrs. Jenkins' birthday, Kate looked at the faces surrounding her. James and Ethan engaged in animated conversation about their college plans. Mrs. Jenkins, beaming at the cake Alex had specially ordered, and Alex himself, watching them all with a contentment that had once seemed impossible. They were an unlikely family, formed not by conventional bonds, but by shared resilience in the face of profound loss. Their journey had begun in separate tragedies, yet somehow converged into a narrative of collective healing. Later, as stars appeared above the estate gardens, Kate and Alex walked together along the illuminated paths where their sons had raced. Earlier, the spring air was cool but not cold, fragrant with new blossoms and possibility. "James wants to major in biomedical engineering," Alex said, pride evident in his voice. "He says he wants to design better mobility equipment, inspired by what he and Ethan have experienced." Kate smiled, remembering her own son's excitement about attending the same university. "Ethan's still set on psychology. He's determined to become a counselor for families dealing with sudden disability." "They'll change the world, those two," Alex mused. "They already have," Kate replied softly. "They changed ours." Alex stopped walking, turning to face Kate in the gentle glow of the garden lights. Without the sharp business suits he'd once worn like armor, dressed simply in jeans and a cashmere sweater, he looked more human, more accessible, a man who had learned that vulnerability required more courage than control ever had. "I never believed I'd find peace again," he admitted, his voice low and intimate in the quiet night, "much less something that feels like happiness." Kate stepped closer, drawn by the honesty in his words. "Neither did I." When his hand gently cupped her cheek, she leaned into the touch, allowing herself to acknowledge what had been growing between them for months. Their first kiss was tentative, a question rather than a demand, sweet with the promise of more to come. As they continued their walk, hands intertwined, Kate realized that this was what healing truly meant, not an absence of scars, but the courage to risk being wounded again. Not a return to who they had been before tragedy struck, but an evolution into something new and unexpected. The wood estate stood behind them, its windows glowing warmly against the night sky. Once a monument to loss and shattered dreams, it had become the unlikely setting for a different kind of story, one in which broken pieces found new arrangements, stronger sometimes than the original whole. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, telling Ethan about his father's involvement in the embezzlement scheme, navigating the complexities of their evolving family dynamic, building a foundation that would serve others who had experienced similar traumas. But tonight, under the canopy of stars, Kate allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, grateful for the unexpected path that had led her here. As Alex's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close against the spring chill, Kate rested her head against his shoulder and smiled. Sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the deepest cracks, and the most profound connections grew from the most painful separations. They had all been broken, in different ways and for different reasons. But together somehow they were becoming whole again. Finn. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Alex, Kate, James and Ethan has touched your hearts. Their journey from brokenness to healing reminds us that even in our darkest moments, connection and redemption can be found in unexpected places. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexity of family, loss, and second chances. Find it by clicking the link on your left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique narratives that delve into the depths of human experience. Join our community in the comments below and share your thoughts on Alex and Kate's path to healing. What moments resonated most with you? Until our next story, remember that sometimes our deepest wounds can lead us to our greatest healing. Mom Epilogue, New Beginnings. 1 year later. The coastal home overlooking the Massachusetts shoreline was nothing like the Wood estate. Where the mansion had been imposing and grand, this modern structure was open and welcoming, with wide windows that invited the ocean light and accessible features seamlessly integrated into its design. Catherine Wood stood on the deck, watching the waves crash against the rocky shore below. The gold band on her finger still felt new, though she and Alex had been married for 3 months now. The small ceremony had been held right here on this deck, with James and Ethan serving as best men for their respective parents. "Mom, Dad's back with the groceries," Ethan called from inside the house. It still warmed Kate's heart to hear Ethan refer to Alex that way. The transition hadn't been immediate or without challenges, but over time, Alex had earned the title, through consistent care and genuine affection, for the boy who had become a second son to him. As Kate entered the house, she found Alex unloading grocery bags in the kitchen, James and Ethan already rummaging through them for snacks. "The foundation called while you were out," Kate informed Alex, kissing him briefly before helping with the groceries. The new rehabilitation center received final approval from the city council. Construction can begin next month. Alex's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's fantastic news. We should celebrate." The Wood Foundation for Adaptive Technologies had become their shared passion over the past year. Using a significant portion of the recovered embezzled funds, they had established a non-profit dedicated to developing accessible technologies and creating rehabilitation resources for young people with spinal cord injuries. "I told Professor Jennings about the internship program," James said, munching on an apple he'd claimed from the grocery bag. "She says at least 15 students from the bioengineering department are interested in applying." At 19, James had completed his freshman year at MIT with honors. His focus on adaptive technology design had already earned him recognition within the department, and he spoke with an enthusiasm that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "And I've finished drafting the peer counseling curriculum," Ethan added. "Once James reviews the technical sections, it'll be ready for the pilot program this fall." Kate marveled at how the boys had channeled their own experiences into creating resources for others facing similar challenges. Their shared trauma had forged not just a friendship, but a partnership that promised to impact countless lives. Later that evening, as James and Ethan disappeared to the media room for their weekly gaming tournament, Kate and Alex settled on the deck with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. "I received a letter from the parole board today," Alex said after a comfortable silence. "They're considering early release for Patterson based on his cooperation with the investigation." Kate studied her husband's face, searching for signs of the anger that had once consumed him. "How do you feel about that?" Alex considered the question thoughtfully. 2 years ago, I would have fought it with everything I had. Now," he sighed, looking out at the horizon. His testimony helped bring the real perpetrators to justice. "He's the reason we learned the truth about Rebecca, about Michael's involvement, about the accidents. Without him, we might never have known." Kate nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind his words. The investigation had ultimately identified Victor Harrington as the person responsible for tampering with Rebecca's car. He had been convicted, along with 2 other executives involved in the embezzlement scheme. Michael Morgan had fled the country before he could be arrested, but international warrants ensured he would never return to the United States without facing justice. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Kate said gently. "It means choosing not to let the past dictate your future." Alex took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I sold the estate, I thought I was just leaving behind bad memories. I didn't realize I was making room for something better." The decision to sell the Wood estate had been finalized shortly after their engagement. The property had been purchased by a non-profit organization that planned to convert it into a residential treatment center for adolescents recovering from trauma, a fitting transformation that had brought both Alex and James a sense of closure. "Do you ever miss it?" Kate asked. "The house, I mean, all those generations of history." Alex shook his head. "The only history that matters to me now is the one we're creating together." He glanced through the windows toward the sounds of laughter coming from inside. "All four of us." The simplicity and truth of his statement warmed Kate's heart. Their journey had been anything but conventional, from employer and employee to allies in uncovering painful truths, to friends, partners, and eventually, family. Every step had been marked by challenges, by moments of doubt and fear, but also by increasing trust and deepening connection. "James wants to bring a friend home for the long weekend," Alex mentioned, a hint of amusement in his voice. "A classmate from his adaptive engineering study group." Kate raised an eyebrow. "A friend or a friend?" "He was suspiciously vague on that point," Alex replied with a smile, "but he made a point of mentioning that we should make sure the guest room is ready." "I'm glad," Kate said sincerely. "He deserves to find someone who sees him the way we see each other." Alex's expression softened as he gazed at his wife. "As a complete person, not defined by scars or limitations." Exactly. As twilight deepened around them, Kate reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them to this moment. If someone had told her 3 years ago that her son's accident would ultimately lead to finding a partner who understood her completely, a second son who enriched their lives immeasurably, and a purpose that gave meaning to their shared pain, she would never have believed it. So yet here they were, not despite their brokenness, but because of it. Their shared wounds had created spaces where compassion could take root, where understanding could flourish. Inside the house, the sound of James and Ethan's laughter rose above the crashing waves, a reminder that healing didn't always look like restoration to a previous state. Sometimes it looked like something entirely new and unexpected, a mosaic more beautiful for having been broken and reassembled with care. Alex's arm slipped around Kate's shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. Together, they watched the first stars appear above the darkening ocean, silent witnesses to the enduring truth they had discovered, that even the deepest cracks could become channels for light, and that love, when it finally arrived, could make even the most damaged hearts whole again. Dear listeners, thank you for joining us on this emotional journey with Alex, Kate, James, and Ethan. Their story reminds us that sometimes our deepest wounds become the foundation for our greatest healing, and that family is less about blood and more about who chooses to stand beside us when life is at its hardest. If you found yourself moved by this narrative of healing and second chances, we invite you to explore our special collection of similar stories by clicking the link below. Each one offers a unique perspective on resilience, love, and the human capacity for renewal. We'd love to hear which moments in this story resonated most with you. Was it Alex and James's healing relationship, Kate's strength in the face of adversity, or perhaps the beautiful friendship between James and Ethan? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if this story touched your heart. By doing so, you'll ensure you never miss our daily stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human experience. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most beautiful things come together only after being broken apart.